This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Tuesday. It's June 27th, 2023. We get at thetruthcentral.com. Thank you for joining us. thetruthcentral.com. Every weekday we're broadcasting a podcast. First story, the U.S. economy continues to move in the wrong direction. Now, I'm going to be warning everybody about this pretty strongly today, but this is an article that's up by Michael Snyder. Michael Snyder is a good writer. He's very much onto the apocalypse is coming. And he is saying that all the good news about what the Biden administration is saying, how we're on the right track, thanks to the Federal Reserve, blah, 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 blah. But no, the interest rates are much higher. The money supply has been contracting at the fastest pace since the Depression. That's what I want to concentrate on today, because he's bringing it up. More than 54% of Americans disapprove of how Biden's handling his jobs. I can't imagine anybody approves of it. At any rate, the year to growth in the money supply is at minus 12%. Now, when the money supply contracts, the economy contracts. Even though we're printing all this money, the money supply is down. We're lending less money. There's less business activity. This is down from the March rate of negative 9.75. We're now minus 12%. And that's negative growth below 10% for the second rate in the row of money supply. This is the greatest contraction of money supply since the Great Depression. Now, that's an extremely important statement. And we're just beginning to see the list of failures in the economy, which are going to start mounting, unfortunately. Ford Motor Company is planning to lay off several hundred salaried employees starting as soon as next week. That's what the Detroit Free Press is reporting. The action will be limited to white-collar workers in North America, perhaps just the United States. But we're seeing on the latest unemployment numbers that the unemployment numbers are up for the most we've seen since October 2021. Now, this is not good news, because if the U.S. economy starts to contract and we see the joblessness numbers, by the way, the contraction is the strongest in California, New Jersey, and Connecticut. California had a massive increase in the number of unemployment claims being filed. But there's some other statistics, not just the 3.7% unemployment. These numbers are very much manipulated. I keep looking at the number of unemployed people did increase to 6.1 million, but the U6 unemployment rate, which is the people who want to work but they've given up searching for even and those working part-time because they can't find full-time, that's 6.7% of the economy right now, 6.7% of all workers. Now, you add those together, you've got over 10% of the workforce being reported either out of work or working part-time because that's all they can find. Now, that's not a good sign. That's a sign of an economic slowdown, and it's going to be massive. Now, the next story, I think, is one of the ones that kind of makes the point. The German central bank, the Deutsche Bank, the European Central Bank had a bond scheme that failed. And what they were trying to do is essentially replicate what the Federal Reserve has done with this buying our own debt, quantitative easing, they call it. Last year, after the UK had to put $11 billion, that's about $13.9 billion, to cover holes in the Bank of England's bond buying program, the German Federal Audit Office has announced that the Bundesbank may need a bailout to cover losses from the European Central Bank's bond buying scheme. Now, what was the bond buying scheme? Basically, the Bundesbank going back to about 2015, had been arguing against this buying their own debt, buying the EU debt, but they began doing it. So the ECB's public sector purchase, which was launched in 2015, the bank began purchasing sovereign bonds from Eurozone nations, which were at that time being issued at low interest rates. Now, as interest rates have increased, these bonds have to be marked to market at a deep discount, which means that the Bundesbank may not have the capital it needs, that the central bank of Germany may need a bailout to cover losses incurred because of the European Central Bank's bond buying scheme, which resulted in losses to the European Central Bank. Now, this is a collapsing scenario. And what I want to point out to you is we've got here a downward cascading. They're calling it kind of like a doom loop, which is a new term I've heard in economics recently that they're using. But what it means is a compounding, what they would call a perfect storm. In other words, you've got a compounding of factors here which intensify the downward nature of the problem, and one leads to another. In other words, okay, so we've covered San Francisco, which we've covered that repeatedly on the show, which is, I think, now a failed city. Because what's happened in San Francisco is, number one, you've got commercial real estate that is not being occupied. Workers are not coming back to work after the pandemic. And the situation in downtown San Francisco, once this little beautiful gem of a city, which I loved, is now filthy, homelessness, drugs all over the place, human feces all over the place, dangerous, crowds somewhat psychotic, sleeping in the streets looking for drugs, not knowing really where they are, what they're doing, not cared for, health problems, dangerous. Why go downtown? I mean, the Hilton Hotel walked away from its loan. It just walked away from it. Now, the bank will ultimately come after Hilton for that, but it was worth having to deal with the bank on the bank's losses on the loan, and the bank is going to have to take losses on that too, which will impact their balance sheet. Once the buildings are empty and the commercial real estate begins defaulting, other stores have to close because people aren't going downtown. They don't need to eat lunch. They don't need to eat dinner downtown. They don't shop. So and then it's just as dangerous for the restaurants. You've got shoplifting rampant. You've got a woke mayor who is wanting to defund the police, and the city is going to eventually go bankrupt. And eventually, he's not very far away, wanting more money in order just to bail it out. But it will not stop its destructive policies. This is a deliberate deconstruction. This is intentional, not because the woke community thinks that they want to destroy America because they think they're uplifting America. But the truth is they're destroying the economic base of America because they're attacking capitalism. They're saying capitalism is racist. You know, earning money in private property is racist. Everything is racist. They're interested in reparations. They're interested in all these other nonsensical ideas that are essentially doomed intentionally by those who crafted them. That's really the point I'm trying to drive home. Intentionally by those who crafted them. That the powers behind creating woke, the Marxist powers, knew that this whole theory, this critical race theory, which comes out of the Frankfurt School, is going to produce its desired result, which is to destroy America and to destroy Donald Trump is saying we're a third world country. Well, you've got the woke gay parades saying, transgenders doing bizarre acts, walking naked in the streets, saying, we're coming after your children. I mean, this is insanity. And the economic crash here is going to be severe, which is why I'm warning you. And Chris, I'm going to have your comment in a second, but I'm saying, and I please take a look at this new book I've written, We're going to be doing a program here with Dean Heskin today, a little bit later on. We'll be broadcasting it as a special program. But there's a global crash coming. And I don't think it can be prevented right now. Now, people are going to say, well, gold still is trading at under $2,000 an ounce. Buy it now. Because with the stock market's, 33,000, it's doing well. Get out now. People always wait too long. They don't see these trends coming. When you've got a stock market that is buoyed up by Federal Reserve spending, but the money supply is decreasing, it's time to understand we're building a recession that's going to be maybe depression-like. And if you get out first, you can take your winnings off the table. If you have your IRA or your 401k in the stock market through mutual funds, you're going to take a double whammy. The mutual funds are investing in this ESG, environmental, social governance, which is climate change nonsense, which will lower your yield. Take a look at our sponsors, Eric Smith, Decisions Technology. Take a look at this tool. It's a free tool where you can look at your mutual funds and see how well your mutual funds are doing. It's under Say Rita. That's his website. Just go to the Truth Central. Look at the broadcast we have with Eric. Take a look at it. It's very important that you understand that you're being lied to again by the mutual funds, that your fund may not be doing particularly well. Find out how it ranks against all others like it in the same categories. It's a free tool that you can use. There's Eric Smith, and those are the broadcasts we've been doing with them. And also, please support our sponsors. Go to Swiss America. Dean Heskin. Take a look at the silver dollar half Walking Liberty $50 offer. 250 of these coins. Even if you're new in investing in gold, you want to put 3 or 5% of what you're earning into gold. It's a good idea. Gold is going to double in what we're going through. Chris, you want to comment?
I used to produce a radio show called Money Matters with a financial expert, and we bring CEOs and investing experts from around the world to the table. Every once in a while, we'd have somebody talk about how important it was to at least look into some of your savings being put into gold or other precious metals because of appreciation issues and, of course, declining dollar times, recessionary periods, that sort of thing. I'm not giving financial advice, and they weren't doing that either. But the idea is to explore something like this, and the best way to do it is to talk to somebody who knows. And these guys at Swiss America do know, and it's very easy to just sign up, like you were saying, right here with the Walking Liberty $50. It's a nice introduction, and it's a very simple, inexpensive introduction to the world of precious metals. And you can learn more by talking to these guys.
We're passionate about the people who are sponsors on this show, and it's a news item as well, because if you don't understand the fundamental dynamics of what's going on, I mean, I follow a lot of different newsletters, and if I look, for instance, at one of the ones I've followed for years, Shadow Statistics, I'm sure that John Williams is right now going berserk with all this. June 25th to 27th, his headlines are: home sales declined year to year by 20%. May building permits and housing starts both continued on track for their fourth consecutive quarters of year-to-year decline. University of Michigan's early June 2023 consumer sentiment gained 7.9% in the month, still holding shy by minus 36.7%. That's the highest since recovering from the pandemic. May industrial production declined negative 0.2% in the month. May retail activity was on track with contractions, reflecting patterns of economic slowdown. The June Federal Reserve paused interest rates, but Federal Reserve Chairman indicated at least 2 more rates coming in the next few months. These are not good signs. These are essentially signs that are extremely important to watch. The April money supply is reflecting still extreme flight to liquidity. You've got intensifying inflation pressures, which are stimulated by the printing of money. And he's saying basically the benchmarks here that he's looking at, going back to the 90s to see downturns which were showing up in the 90s, which emerged a little bit later on in 2007, 2008, with the collapse in the subprime market. But these early signs are going to accelerate. He's saying Uncle Sam's been playing Russian roulette with the federal deficit and the debt ceiling. And he said that was partly resolved by eliminating the debt ceiling. Yet no actions taken, and none appears likely in the foreseeable future to contain unfettered federal government's deficit spending going forward or otherwise, letting alone addressing the concept of establishing long-run solvency or financial stability guidelines for U.S. fiscal operations. Again, broadly, the current U.S. economy is in a rapidly deteriorating and intensifying economic downturn amidst still unfolding resurgent inflation pressures driven by Federal Reserve money creation. The Fed is also looking still to hike interest rates, which would also help to crash the economy further, but not contain the money supply driven inflation. The administration and Congress appear to be absent from providing meaningful help, having just accelerated the circumstances by eliminating the debt ceiling. This is from a website called Shadow Stats, SHADOWSTATS.com. The economist John Williams. I followed John Williams for 20 years, and he's been right. He's been right in his predictions, and he's predicting what I'm predicting, and that is, I'm telling everybody, people say, I wish I'd bought that house 10 years ago. Look at how much it's increased in value. Well, 10 years ago, you thought it was expensive. I wish I'd bought gold in 2008 and 2009 before it doubled to 2000. It was 1,000. It was cheap. Well, 2,000 is going to be cheap because the money supply in the United States in contraction. The dollar is under attack from many different ways, and I can't tell you enough pressing the alarm here that we are in for a massive economic downturn, and the best way to protect yourself is to get out of debt to the extent you can, reduce spending to the extent you can, and get some gold, because it will maintain its value. And when your dollar's going to the grocery store, don't buy very much anymore. Take $100 and see what it buys today at the grocery store. Chris, any final comments before we move on to another topic?
Well, you're talking about government waste. I've been reading the list of assessments for the U.S. government, and it winds up that they're allocating an extra $450 of taxpayer money to the John Fetterman office so he can buy some decent suits.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea.
Just kidding, but there is a lot of government.
Buy him a brain.
There is a lot of government waste, and it's fascinating what some of the what the government spent money on over the last 30, 40 years. I remember there was a gentleman named Martin Gross who wrote books in the 1990s about government waste, the tax racket and tax spending, that sort of thing. I remember studies about monkeys and which crayons they prefer. This is pure government waste, and a lot of that really, really needs to stop. That's a start.
Well, that's a start. Let's go to the next. This BlackRock. The next story is saying now that they don't like ESG investing. Well, why don't BlackRock manages about $20 trillion of assets? It's one of the most powerful investment management firms in the world. Larry Fink is the head of it, and he's now at meetings saying, "Oh, well, we're not going to do this woke investing." Well, why aren't they doing woke investing? Because Republican-led states yanked $4.5 billion from BlackRock in 2022 because of its ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing. And Fink noted that Florida's move to withdraw $2 billion in assets also damaged BlackRock. Missouri, Louisiana, these states are pulling out. Your assets in retirement being invested in mutual funds that are ESG investing are going to lose you investment return that you could have otherwise had. And the whole agenda on climate change, which I'm going to get to in a minute, is completely fraudulent. If we go to this next story, which one I also I want to emphasize how broke this woke is. Hollywood is going broke, and I'm not going to miss Hollywood, quite frankly. It's filthy. It's producing bizarre movies. All it's going to do is superhero this, superhero that. And what Hollywood is realizing is that these movies are losing a ton of money. That Hollywood won't claim it's because of they're woke, but just take a look at Disney and see what Disney's done lately. This Turning Red, a metaphorical animated movie exploring female puberty and menstruation. Well, that menstruation, that's really good. Lost 168 million. Lightyear featured a lesbian relationship. It was released right after the fight with Florida and Disney had, and that lost 106 million. Strange World, another animated children's feature film, thinly veiled climate change propaganda and an LGBT relationship between teen boys. That lost $197 million. Peter Pan and Wendy. I can't wait to see what this one was about. Live action adaptation of the classic. It was a race swapped Peter Pan with a race swapped Tinkerbell, gender swapped Lost Boys, and a Mary Sue like Wendy that battles 200-pound pirates with her sword fighting skills. Well, that one lost millions. Little Mermaid, a live action adaptation, race swapped with classic Dutch fairy tale character, changed into the message of a mermaid seeking the love of a prince to, quote, she don't need no man to save her, end quote. The movie lost 20 million. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This one's probably going to ruin the whole Indiana Jones franchise. Listen to this plot. The film attempts to undermine and deconstruct its title character, Indiana Jones, and replace him with an anti-capitalist feminist activist who has been met with thumbs down from audiences and critics that have seen it. Along with disdain from fans of the franchise, it's expected to lose hundreds of millions of dollars due to its massive budget. And then, of course, my favorite, Elemental. It's a film about racism with Disney's first animated non-binary character. It's crashing at theaters. The movie had the second worst box office in Pixar history. Company was once viewed as a sure thing. So the list goes on here. And, Amazon hijacking Lord of Rings with their woke Rings of Power series. Production losses in the billions. I mean, it's just a massive, massive disaster. And then, of course, the woke is about as successful as the climate change movement and the fact that we've got to have fake beef, which is being now introduced. I see Bill Gates is now finally saying that he's getting approval, USDA approval for his fake meat company. And that's, of course, going to essentially mean that we're going to be eating artificial food as beef. And various doctors are saying that it is essentially going to be, again, another massively processed food, which is obviously not going to be good for people to eat. And essentially, when we get to these things, we're having insanity rule. This insanity is ruling. And the last story I want to cover, and I want to cover this one a little bit of depth, is the fact that we are seeing finally one of the climate activists who has been pretty much on the climate change agenda is saying, wait a minute, this was a very interesting story. It was Mike Hume, who is Hulme, who has written books about climate change, but mostly from the perspective of agreeing with climate change. And he is saying essentially that climate change is gone too far. that when you get everything attributed to climate change, this is one of the educational pages about climate change on the BBC's website for children, laid out the negative impacts of future global warming. He pointed out that warmer temperatures could mean healthier outdoors, but the problem is when you get the example of what climate change is going to be responsible for, climate change is cited as the sole explanation for everything gone wrong in the world. Drought, famine, flooding, wars, racism, you name it. And you've got here a groupthink phenomenon. So the doctrine, this whole doctrine, which he's calling climatism, a seeming explanation for nearly everything, from loss of sleep, rising divorce rates, to the decline of insect populations. An academic study has even suggested that the occurrence and acceptance of racist content online could increase in the future as climate change gets worse. The doctrine was summed up by a climate change convention in Germany in 2022, which declared climate change threatens the foundation of life on our planet. The fossil era must come to an end. This will lead to profound changes in our ways of producing goods, our means of transportation, and ultimately in the way in which we live. We are in the beginning of a great transformation. That great transformation is eat bugs, live in a tiny home or a cell of an apartment or a condo in some city where you're packed in and not able to go more than 15 minutes from where you live, or all your electronics switch off and you don't have any money because it's all globally controlled. And climate change is the driving lie, the driving ideology, which is propelling this whole young generation to self-destruct. To say, well, we can't get married, we can't have children, we can't eat meat, we've got to eat bugs. You're destroying our lives because of the grocery stores are filled with these useless products, and you can't drive cars. We have to close down in New York City the fire-burning pizza places because their ovens are producing carbon dioxide, and we're all going to die. This is nonsense. And I'm going to go into two aspects of it. Chris, I'll let you comment. I want to show my books on this, but I want to talk about a couple other people's books as well. So why don't you comment on this nonsense of climate change?
As it always seems to be, it's blame everything on climate change or racism. It depends on what the big issue of the day is or what needs more attention. If it's divorce, as you said, it was climate change. If it's El Nino, it's climate change. If it's a little extra rain during one year, it's always man-made climate change. And of course, scores on math tests go bad. Well, it's racism. Maybe a little bit of climate change because kids don't do better with warmer weather. I don't know. The idea is it's embedded in people's heads. Hollywood used to be really good at the propaganda like that because we have generations of people believing all this stuff. Now they just bop it over your head, like you were saying it before, and it got worse. The joke is get woke, go broke. But if you bash it over people's heads, people get sick and tired of it, especially if it's a very extreme minority fringe point of view being pushed and shoved down people's throats.
Well, the climate, I want to read this is a book I consider to be, I'm going to continue to recommend books because people need to read and they're not reading enough. This is a book here. It's called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. I'll get it here so you can see it. And it's by Matthias Desmet, Desmet. You can see his name down there at the bottom. Matthias Desmet, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. It's not a very long book, but it's very good. I want to read a paragraph from him. He calls it mass formation. Mass formation is like mass hypnosis. He's saying that's what we're dealing with climate change and all these other ideologies. They become a mindset, which is like a malware in a computer. It's like the computer won't run correctly once this program of climate change becomes adopted by the believer. So he says the totalitarian leader differs from an idealist in that he shows a radical, fanatical blindness, but definitely also because of a remarkable lack of principle and aversion to laws. For example, he typically rules by decree, Fauci, pandemic, on the basis of temporary rules that can be adjusted at his discretion. The only law he really upholds is there are no laws. This is a risk we also run with the coronavirus pandemic, where emergency rules have suspended established laws and fundamental rights, just as the climate change movement would do. There's Desmond. And this is a risk we also run with the, in such an emergency, there is no right to protest, no need for a government to have actions approved by Parliament or Congress, no need to respect private property. I mean, how many pizza joints in New York would you have to close down for their fire ovens to compensate for one John Kerry private jet ride to Europe? Combined with the fact that the medical tests with questionable validity have become an accepted basis on which to declare a pandemic emergency at virtually any time, the magnitude of risk to individuals and societies is incalculable. He says the frenetic urge of totalitarianism is to impose a basic logic on society that manifests itself in the obsession with signs, uniforms, badges, messages. And the psychological impact is that it becomes unthinking slogans, but yet people become, anybody who doesn't take the vaccine is going to make me sick. So they turn against those who don't agree with their ideological point of view. The vicious cycle in which mass formation and totalitarianism typically end up is a certain way reassuring. Mass formation and totalitarianism inevitably destroy themselves by way of logical necessity. They are intrinsically self-destructive. The underlying mechanism of self-destructiveness can be understood in this way. Mass formation, this hypnosis, climate change, etc., feeds on anxiety and aggression. With the fear and the prospect of venting this aggression, the mass dynamics grind to a halt. Leaders realize that if this happens, the masses will wake up because aware of the damage they've suffered, whereupon they will turn against the leaders in a lethal fashion. Consequently, the leaders have no choice but to keep identifying new objects of anxiety, introducing new measures to destroy such objects. We've got to get rid of cows. We've got to get rid of farms. We've got to get rid of pizza ovens. We've got to get rid of the climate change nutcases. And the totalitarianism part of the population follows them willingly for reasons that, it's kind of mass formation. Their anxiety gives them a way to vent their frustrations in destructiveness on a simple idea. Essentially, they're saying the self-destructiveness of totalitarian systems reaches its peak the moment the system succeeds in gagging any dissenting voice and silencing the opposition. Well, that's about where we are, because you can't propose that this is science is nonsense. Now, and by the way, another book, two more books I'm going to, well, maybe three. Okay, so first of all, read this book by, I've been constantly talking about Kohei Saito, Marx in the Anthropocene. They're now reading Climate Change into Marx. That Marx believed that capitalism was going to destroy us because of hydrocarbon fuels emitting carbon dioxide. And they say that we have now degrowth capitalism. He wants us to deconstruct capitalism, quit using hydrocarbon fuels, and destroy capitalist society. It's a Marxist idea. It's intended to destroy our ability to, it's depopulationist. It is the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is anthropos, human beings in ancient Greek. We are the cause of our own destruction. We exhale carbon dioxide. Okay. I've written these books, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, Climate Change. There are a whole chapter here on the Milankovitch cycles, which is how the Earth goes around the sun. It's very complex. But when we get into our most elliptical pattern, more like an egg, farthest away from the sun, about every 100,000 years, we have an ice age. It doesn't matter how much carbon dioxide there is. The sun heats the Earth. It isn't carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is like 0.04% of the atmosphere. It's a minor greenhouse gas chemical. Water vapor, not clouds, but water vapor is the major greenhouse gas on Earth. They're not talking about eliminating water vapor because hydrocarbon fuels don't emit water vapor. If they did, they'd be demonizing water vapor. I'm pointing out to you that in this book, read it. I'm going to put a whole new book out pretty soon about abiotic fuel, because this is not fossil fuel. Oil, these are natural products of the earth. But it combines the next book, which is now I'm just doing the final editing on right now, which is The Truth About Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. That's what we're in. We're in a period of time where this Marxism has taken over. We're teaching it in the schools. And what it produces is insanity, because it's destructive. It can't, when the Marxists take over, this book points it out. When you can read it, when it's in print, you'll see it, that essentially we have Stalin, millions of people die because he starves them to death in his collective farm experiments. Mao, millions of people die because of the Great Leap Forward. And again, he takes the peasants off of the land. Bad ideas. Communism results in insane ways to live. It's a vicious, it's killed millions and millions of people everywhere it's ever been. It's destroyed economies. The religious side to what we're dealing with. Jonathan Cahn. These are the books I'm reading right now. And I encourage you to read them. I encourage you to read 8 or 10 books at the same time. It is the truth. This book, Jonathan Cahn was the one who did the book about the Harbinger, putting up the Twin Towers, and how it was very much like the repeat of what was done in ancient Israel, where they thought that they could restore the walls and they could make it greater. It's hubris. It's us. The fundamental idea here is that when we move away from God, we are inviting the pagan gods to come in. And these pagan gods are vicious. One of them, Moloch. Let me read you about Moloch. The name Moloch can be translated as king. A number of modern scholars have theorized that the word Moloch could be translated as a verb, denoting the act of child sacrifice rather than a god. But verses such as Leviticus 25, which reads in the original Hebrew, it said, who prostitute themselves with Moloch, would argue against that. And to every sacrifice there is a god. Still, there would remain a god to whom the child sacrifices spoken of in Scripture were offered. Some theorize that Moloch was another form of Baal, B-A-A-L, since he too is spoken of receiving children as sacrifices. But even if there was anything to these theories, the act and practice of sacrificing children is a demonic realm so uniquely of its own category and nature that the name Moloch stands uniquely on its own. The horror of the name. Okay, what he's saying, Jonathan Cahn, is that in aborting babies, we are sacrificing to the ancient gods. We've got to stop. Can't be killing our babies. And it's a great sin against God to take life and to kill it this way. Last one, Surprised Again. This is a great book by Alex Pollock, the Mises Institute. If you don't think I'm on track with talking about the great economic crisis we're facing, read this book. There's a lot of people out there saying that this economics that we're in now is not sustainable. We've gone a little bit of overtime. Chris, any final comments? We're going to wrap up.
It's funny when somebody speaks out, like an Alex Pollock or somebody similar, who exposes the truth, they do get shot down as racist or anti this or that, just because people who shout the loudest don't want you to hear or read what these people have to say. This is a clear signal that it's a good idea to read their writings. It really is.
That's a good point, Chris. That's a very good point. I mean, and also just look at, go watch, find a video and watch a gay parade. And see, these are people walking around naked, doing all kinds of bizarre things. And you got, national advertisers supporting them because they think they want to be on this agenda. It's a way for, the Bud Lights of the world, the Targets of the world, they're going to get hammered. Because this is not an agenda of the American. It's so insane that once you see it and see how ridiculous it is to demonize carbon dioxide, which is plant food, which will stimulate growth of plants in the earth, It is insanity. If this is how we want to live, then the woke idea in Marxism is a good idea. If you want to lose everything, be on the streets, join the homelessness because you can't pay your mortgage and the bank's going to take back the home because you can't find a job, that's what these people will produce. It's got to come to an end. You can't have a president in the White House who is an obvious criminal who's stolen billions of dollars from our enemies and can't remember his name. He's not running the country. Chris.
Oh boy. The thing is, if he is impeached and found to be guilty of such impeachment and kicked out of office, look what we have coming next. It only gets worse. I still believe Joe Biden's smartest move ever was to ensure that he'll never get impeached or assassinated because of what happens next.
Well, that's a good point. But, when the Department of Justice is after Donald Trump on a bogus lawfare charge that is not about classified documents, it's about the Espionage Act, these aiding our enemies. We are in a desperate state. And I think finally, maybe the economic crash that's coming will be God's attempt at a wake-up call. I'm doing my best here to tell you it's coming. Prepare. As Dr. Jerome Corsi, today is Tuesday. It's June 27th, 2023. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. I pray the price is not nuclear war. In the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, and read it. I'll bring my Bible tomorrow and read it for everyone. We need to get down on our knees and ask God's repentance that we allowed this to happen. We allowed Roe v. Wade. We allowed God to be taken from the schools. We allowed the insanity. This is not civil rights. This is racism. This is anti-white. This is not Martin Luther King. This is not love and hope. This is hate. It is not science. It's made-up science, junk science. And the point that Holm made in that article I was reading was that the academics do the junk science because they get funded, they get promoted. Their colleagues like it. They're in with the current ideology. They may know it's insane, but they don't have the courage or their convictions to take the hit that comes from saying the emperor has no clothes. We're not in control of the climate. Forces are far greater than we have any control over. These are manipulative messages that are malware. We're living in an age of disinformation where we're losing our freedoms. And I pray that we will repent and God will intervene. Jerome Corsi will be back tomorrow. This is the Truth Central. I remain on the theme that the truth is necessary to get out of this situation. And you can only get out of it with the truth. Thank you for joining us. God bless.